Okay, let's talk about dead people.
Yes.
Okay, so small town cemetery, modernizing a historic workflow. If you're not familiar, the town of Holly Springs is located just south of Raleigh. I say small town cemetery, but that's a little bit, that can be relative. We're a town of about 50,000 people, which I think for the Raleigh area is a small town, but other parts of North Carolina might be significantly larger. But our cemetery is managed very, very small town. So why do we modernize? I think in local government, a lot of times we are kind of reactive versus proactive, and so we kind of have the opinion of, if it's not broken, don't fix it, but that leaves us in the situation of where it eventually does break, and then it's like, you need to fix it right now. So that's kind of the situation that we had. I'll talk about the background in just a second, but basically, over time, like the cemetery gets very disorganized, passed from department to department. And so when these records kind of get mixed up, we end up having situations where plots are sold twice to two different people. And so someone is trying to get buried in a plot, and either they go to dig and they find out that, oops, there's somebody already there, or they get buried in a plot, and then later someone's like, hey, actually, I bought that plot first. And so then you have the very fun business where you have to exhume the body and move it to a new plot. And keep in mind that this is, you're dealing with people who have oftentimes just had a death in the family. Like, this is not a fun business for the people that are involved. And so it's a very emotional time. And so for that reason, there's really not a lot of room for mistakes, because especially if the burials just happened, you're reopening a wound for people that they're trying to get closure on. So so let me back up. Basically, we had that situation, and it went all the way up to the town administration, and he was like, okay, it's gotten to the point where this is just not working, so we have to do something about it. We need you to fix it, make it, integrate some technology into this rather than just paper records. So we got the directive from our town manager, you guys have a couple months to do this, and we need to get it done. So a little bit of background. The first burial in the town cemetery was in 1862, so not super old. There's definitely older in the state, but the town didn't actually acquire the cemetery until about 30 years after that. So prior to that, it was managed by a local church, and then the church disbanded, and they gave the cemetery to us. For most of the history of the cemetery, the records were recorded on a physical ledger book. Someone would go in there with a pen and say, John Doe bought this plot for this much money, and just a piece of paper. Eventually they started doing deeds for that stuff, but up until probably like the 1990s, maybe the early 2000s, everything was done on paper. And for the state's reporting purposes, we still do have to have paper records, but it doesn't have to be the only thing. So because of that, many of the paper records were lost over time as the management of the cemetery was passed from department to department. At one point, it was managed by utilities and infrastructure, and then the town clerk's office. So a lot of it was lost over time, and with that transition and just so many hands in the pot, it kind of gets a little bit messy. So what our old process used to look like is the resident would come in, and they would need to purchase a plot. They would talk to the town clerk. She would take them out there. They would pick out the plot. She would take them back. They would write up a deed. She would record that in their Microsoft Access database, and then she would pass that along to the GIS analyst, who would update the map, which was not connected to the Access database at all. So already you can kind of see what the problem is. There's two systems of records that don't talk to each other and two different people reporting in them, which leaves a lot of room for human error. So when we were tasked with this project, a couple of the requirements that we had to meet was all of the data needed to be stored in one place. So we decided that system was going to be GIS. The map needed to be easily updated in ArcGIS Online, because we determined that the town clerk was going to be the one to update that, since she's the subject matter expert. All the plots needed to be predefined in GIS, and I'll talk a little bit about what that means in a second. And then we also wanted to create an interactive map for residents to be able to locate their loved ones, because before that we didn't really have anything except for a paper map that was printed out, and you couldn't read the names of who was buried there. And for people who are into like genealogical research, it's good to have that interactive piece for them. And then the final piece was that we have to report to the state periodically which graves are occupied and who's in them. So we needed the capability to develop reports. So before we go further, a little bit of vocabulary, because when I first started this project, I knew nothing about cemeteries, and it was a little bit confusing. So the first thing that we have is plots. So a plot is, think of it just as a grave site. There's one person buried there, 5 feet by 10 feet. You can fit one coffin. Think P for one person. And then you have a lot, which is a collection of 4 plots or graves. So lot, L for a lot of people. The reason is that we have lots is because it used to be back in the day when cemeteries were more popular, you had to buy an entire lot. So you would buy a lot for your family, but we've since changed it, and so you can now purchase an individual plot. And then we came up with some new language to help residents understand like what the map was showing. So an occupied plot just means that there's somebody down there, and an unoccupied plot means that there's no burial, like someone can be buried there. And then interred is just a nice word to say a buried person. And then a plot, I'll kind of use plot and gravesite interchangeably, so bear with me on that one. So I'm going to kind of walk you through the methods that we used for this project. So we started, this is kind of a timeline of what it looks like. We didn't have this timeline to start. We kind of came up with this as we went along. So we first needed to verify the records that we had, and then we needed to split out all of the plots so that a resident could see exactly what they're purchasing. The third step was to transfer all of that data from the Access database into GIS so that we could reconcile any differences. And if there were any differences, we were going to go out in the field and verify all of them. And then after all of that took place was the web app development phase. So we created 2 experience builder applications, one for the cemetery manager to edit the data, and then a second for the public to use. And then finally we kind of came up with a Laserfiche workflow that helps automate some of this so that it relies less on people remembering to send emails, and it kind of prompts you that like, hey, this person did this thing and now you have a task that you have to do. Okay, so the first step was to verify the existing records. So like I said, we had data in 2 separate locations. So the tabular data was stored in the Access database, and that was the owner name, the buried name, and all of their contact information. That was updated by the town clerk as soon as the purchase occurred, and then she would pass that paper deed along to the GIS analyst who would update the spatial data. So we had a GIS layer that had all of that same information. And as you can guess, it was not always updated correctly. Sometimes the plot numbers were not in order, stuff like that, so it got a little bit confusing. So we went through the entire Access database and basically looked at if the plot owner was in there for, say, like lot 135A, we would go to the map and see 135A, does it have the same owner name and burial information? So we did that for the whole Access database, and then we went through the map as well and did it the other way. If it says this on the map, is there an Access database record for that as well? So it was very painstaking. I'm sure there's a way to automate it and make it easier, but I don't know how to do that, so it took a lot of time. And then we made a note of any plots that were not matching up between the 2 systems, and we would take it to the vault where the records were stored and try to figure out what it was supposed to be. In a lot of cases, there was no record in the vault because it was so old, or it just never made it into the vault for whatever reason. So those are the ones that we flagged to go out and check in the field. So the next piece, kind of simultaneous as the verification, we had an intern who helped us out with this project who was able to split out all the plots. So our old process kind of looked like this, where on the left-hand side, you have that big lot, and it was not divided up into anything. So the resident would essentially have to look at the map and be like, I want that top left corner and the one beneath it. And sometimes that was not translated correctly into the deed. So the deed might not reflect that. So there's a lot of confusion because remember, this is a very emotional time if they've just had someone that's died. So asking them to try to visualize where this is not really going to work for them. But essentially that's what we would do, and then we would split it out. And so you could see, like the example is John Doe purchases 2 plots for her husband or Jane Doe for her husband and herself. Her husband just died and he's being buried. So she purchases 250C and 250D, but she's just looking at that big purple square and she's like, I don't really know what I'm purchasing. So essentially what would happen is our GIS analyst would then split it out after she's purchased it, and the green is where someone's buried and the gray is where the plot has been purchased but no one's been buried yet. So that was a little confusing for residents and for our own staff. So essentially what the intern did was he went ahead and split out all of the plots so that when somebody's coming to purchase a plot and they look at the map, they'll know exactly what they're getting, and it'll match up with what is on the ground when they go to the cemetery. So the next step after we had all those plots and had the data verified was to transfer all of that over into GIS so that we could start doing field work. So we essentially took that unique identifier for the plot, which was the section name and then the plot ID. So it would look something like Carnation, 250D, Iris, 112B, something like that. And I joined that based on that identifier into the GIS layer. As you can guess, it was not a perfect one-to-one join, so there were some duplicate records, which means things had been recorded twice. There were some people that allegedly were buried multiple times in the same plot or in different plots. And then there were some that only showed up in one system. So we definitely had a lot of field work to do. So for the field work, we used field maps. I just took that same GIS layer and made a field map out of it. It involved a lot of context clues and doing our best with what we had. We would try to verify the ones that we had flagged as needing verification, but what we quickly discovered is that there were also some things out there that had never been recorded in either system. Neither the access database nor the GIS layer. So we'd be out there and we're like, there is a headstone there, and it was not recorded anywhere. So there was a lot of context clues because you don't always have the information that you need in the tabular form. So a lot of times it's, okay, I think there's supposed to be someone here, but they don't have a headstone. But based off of the deeds and the map, I know that such and such is buried to the right and such is buried to the left. So we're just going to deduce that this person is there. We probably could have done some ground penetrating LiDAR, but we didn't have any of that available to us. The funeral home guy, the way that he kind of checked to see if somebody was down there is a little primitive and barbaric. He had a pole and if it hits something, then someone's down there. So sorry to the people that were down there. And then the other part was that we were going to take pictures of all the headstones to add to our experience builder for the public version so that they can see what their loved ones' headstones look like. And then another challenge with this was that the graves are not always in perfect rows and columns. So in really nice cemeteries, they're surveyed out, very professionally done. Ours were not done that way. And when you stand at the end of the row and look down, it should be like a perfect line, but they're kind of like that. And then there's some that are like right in between, in the middle, and you kind of have to guess which row they're supposed to go in. All that to say, this is not a perfect process, but we're GIS people, so we do the best that we can. And then this is just a little show and tell of some of the cool, like older graves that we had in the older section. Some of these are from like the late 1800s. Another challenge was that these older ones were very difficult to read. So a lot of times the text was very worn down. And really the only way that I could figure it out is if I like literally traced it out with my finger, hoping that I don't awaken anything, but. Okay, so the next part was my favorite part, which was the experience builder. So we just used, we kind of incorporated a form with this. So the cemetery manager slash town clerk, she wears two hats. When someone would purchase a plot, whether it was pre-need or if someone was going to be buried in the next couple of days, she was going to be able to come in here. She could click on that exact plot that she had sold them and update the information that she had. So we created two forms. It's kind of hard to see, but on the left-hand side, that's the form section, and there's two different tabs. So when you're updating the owner information, there's one form, and then when you're updating the burial information, there's another. Because the owner is oftentimes not the same person as that's been buried. A lot of times, it could be a family that's owned the plot for several generations, and we don't really update the deed. As long as you can prove that you are related to this person and that you're like the next of kin, or that you have the permission of the next of kin, then you're allowed to be buried there. Okay. The second one was the public-facing interactive map, which is pretty much the same thing, just a little bit dumbed down with less information because we wanted to protect like contact information. So same thing, you select a plot, it'll show you a pop-up that has the name of the person that's buried if it's occupied. If it's unoccupied, it'll just say the name of the person that owns it. And if we are able to find the information, we would also include the birth date and the death date. And then we used the search bar and incorporated that with the layers. So you can search for a loved one based on their name. You can search for someone based on the name of the owner of the plot. Or you can, if you happen to know the ID, you can type that in. And when you select it, it'll just zoom you right there and you can see all the information. The last piece of this was that Laserfiche workflow that I mentioned before. Which I did not do this. We have a business analyst that specializes in Laserfiche, so she was able to help us with this. This is just to say that GIS projects don't necessarily have to just be done by GIS people. Use all the resources available to you to help yourself, save yourself some headache and save some headache for the people that you work with. So this looks really complicated, but it's actually simpler than the other workflow because essentially what happens now is someone comes in and purchases it, a deed is automatically generated, and then the finance department actually gets a notification that there's a payment. So I don't really know if they were just like paying with cash or something before, but now the finance department is incorporated in this workflow. And it automatically sends email notifications to say like, hey, finance, like this person has been approved to purchase it, so now they're going to be coming to you, and then finance process the payment, they do their thing, and it goes back to the cemetery manager. She gets a notification that says it's been paid. You can go ahead and print out the certificate of burial rights and record that in the vault, and then also the purchaser now automatically gets a copy of this information, which is super helpful. Okay, so I know that was a lot of information. Are there any questions on cemetery stuff? I will do my best to answer. Yes.
Based on historical segregation between either religion or race, is there any differences in that? And did you guys show that, I guess, based on your experience with it?
So we were really limited in the information that we had like historically. I don't know if there were any like segregation laws against certain people buried in certain sections or anything like that. I'm not entirely sure. I'm sure our town clerk knows the answer because she's very into all of that historical stuff. What we do know is that in the older section, a lot of times we don't even have like the names of the people that were buried there. It's just like a family name, because the older sections, they weren't, that was back before they were even like dividing them into like the 5x10 plots. You would essentially just go to the church or if it was managed by the town, and you would say, I want a plot that's this size, and you would specify the exact size, and then you could just fit however many people you could fit in there. But that's a good question, and I'll definitely look into that.
I'm sorry if I missed this because I was late tonight, but if you had already stated it, is it just one cemetery that your application
We only have one cemetery. That's a good question. When we first started this, we started with ArcGIS Online has a cemetery solution, and we thought that we started with that. However, I feel like that's more geared towards when you have multiple cemeteries that your town manages. And so it was very robust, but it kind of didn't fit our needs. So we kind of went our own way and just made that one experience builder. Yeah, because we just have the one.
I was just curious if, you said you do have plots that are like family plots, many-to-one relationships where people are buried one on top of each other, common for spouses and family. Do you have that, or is it just a one-to-one relationship for each plot?
It's pretty much, now it's a one-to-one relationship to each plot. We don't really have too many situations where, like, a good example of that is like if someone's buried and then if someone is like a traditional burial, but then their spouse is cremated and they're buried with that person, the way that we handle that is we have a secondary field. So if there's somebody else buried with them, we'll just add their name to that, and it will come up in the search as well. But I think I could probably count on one hand the number of situations that occurred. The other situation that we ran into, kind of going off of that, is that we have some cemetery relocations. So if there is a development that was being built and the archaeologist is surveying the area and they find that there is a cemetery, a family cemetery from like the 1800s, a lot of times they would relocate those to our cemetery. And the challenge with those is, with the older ones, is that most of the time those people were not buried in concrete vaults. There was just pine boxes. So we don't really know who exactly was there, and there wasn't really a whole lot of there weren't a lot of remains to be able to do any kind of genetic testing on. So we have like lots that are marked out as like, you know, the 12 Oaks Family Cemetery, and we'll try to figure out what kind of information we'll try to, if we know anything about the family that lived there, we'll try to put that information in the GIS, but a lot of times that's all that we have available to us.
Yeah, you mentioned that you have to submit reports to the state. Could you elaborate a little bit on that? Like, who do you submit the reports to? And
I don't exactly know. I think it's the state archaeologist office. I might be making that up. But essentially, I do know that we have to report every 6 months. We have to generate a report that says how many of our plots are occupied, and if we know who's in them, we have to submit that as well. Our town clerk knows a little bit more about that. But she just needed the ability to be able to generate that report. So if you see in this Experience Builder app, there's a filter at the top that you turn on, and it turns off everything except for those plots that are occupied. And then she can go into the attribute table and just export an Excel sheet. And she doesn't actually have to send that to the state. We just have to have it on file in case something comes up. But good question.
So there's a website called Cemetery Census, which has got some really comprehensive surveys of cemeteries all across North Carolina and many other states. I wondered if you had, if you've been sharing any data with them forward or backward.
We have not. When we were first going through this process, I think we tried to avoid using any of those like public things because our town is very careful about being the authoritative source of information that we share. So they wanted us to be able to say, like, if we're sharing this information to the public, they wanted us to be able to say, like, yes, this is information that we've collected, we know for sure, or to the best of our knowledge, like, that this is accurate, or as accurate as possible. But I think our town clerk does do a lot of research related to those. So that would definitely be something interesting to look into.
All right, we could probably take one more question, and then we've got to let the next speaker come.
Sorry, I might have missed this when you first started, but is this just for flat land, or is this, I guess, is it applicable for raised structures, cemetery, like structures as well, when people are?
The cemeteries, the Esri Cemetery solution, I think you can use it with like columbariums and stuff like that. I think there's a couple different ways that I think you could do that. If you either like layer like you could essentially make the plots and just make them small and layer them, Or you could probably do that as just like a tabular format. We don't have a columbarium. There's talks of them adding one, so that might be a potential thing that we look into in the future.